Alrighty. Hey, everybody. My name is Storm Anderson, and today we are going to be looking at one of my favorite ways of really trying to craft a different form experience, and that is through creating a modal to sit in front of whatever other components you have on the screen. And so one of the reasons why I do like this is because just from a UI UX standpoint, it looks a little cleaner to have some of the interactions be presented in this way. So the focus of the user is now on the form, and either moving away from the form or submitting the form are the only two options, rather than someone getting halfway through and kind of getting lost and clicking around. So what we have here starting off is the template that we'll typically use, just presenting a basic navigation across the top with our logo. If we had a menu drop down, that's a different video that I can show you how we recreate our side navigation, but for now, this will do. So we have our template, and behind the scenes, we have a single SharePoint list called project requests. And this one just has a relatively straightforward schema. We reuse the title field. We add a request details, which is a multi-line. We have a assigned field. This is a person field, and a due date and request type. Our request type is just limited to a few different options here as a choice field: training, development, architecture. So with this list, let's go back to our template. And if you haven't already brought it in, let's first go to the data tab, go to your connectors. If you have the connection, you should be able to see it appear here. Otherwise, you can search through for the rest of them as well. So once you have the project request bought in, let's now go back to the tree view. And just so we have some content to put our modal in front of, let's go ahead and go to the insert, and let's put in a data table. So once that pops up, using either the property pane or the quick data source selector, let's just put it to project requests, and you'll see our fields populate. So we could get in a little bit more to how we would organize this or adding other content here. But for now, we just want this. And then the next thing we'll do is go ahead and bring in a button. And so our button here is going to be what triggers the new request modal to appear. So now that we have the basic content, again, nothing too fancy, let's go ahead and start building our modal. And so whenever I'm doing this, I typically always like to start without the dynamicism. So what would the modal look like? And then let's make it appear and disappear. And so when we think about a modal, there's some really core pieces that we can call out as we start to think about it. And that is the shading background that's typically behind it, which allows you to see through, for the most part, to the content behind it, but it doesn't allow you to interact with it. And then the other core piece, of course, is the form section or the dialogue section. So to recreate that shadow, we can bring in a rectangle. And we're just going to make this the full size of the screen. And the simple trick here is to go for the fill property, 60, and somewhere around this range for an opacity. So you can either use full black or maybe partial black. And now you can see that I can see through to the content behind it. So now that we have our shadow, let's add another rectangle here. This one we can kind of center. There we go. And so this one will represent our actual form. Maybe make it a little wider. And so that's the background. We would also have another section here on the, or rather the top of the section, which would be the header. And also the final piece then would be having a new icon. So let's go to insert. And this icon will sit here in the top right. And as you see it transition, what we can do is make the fill background red and the color white. And now you can see we have a very simple modal. Let's actually maybe make this not so black. Let's maybe make this Here, we'll change it directly. Let's just make this to somewhere like this. There we go. That looks a little cleaner. Okay, so now that we have the core pieces, let's bring in the other information here. So let's just put something across the top to give this a label. This is the new request form. Let's make that white. And now, since this is dedicated to submitting a new request, we're actually going to add a edit form. We will connect that data source again to project requests. And now you can see we have our fields. So maybe just to make this a little more spaced out, we can do some things here. So I'm just readjusting the size of some of this. So as you start to add your content to the modal, that's where you can really start to make the adjustments as you need to. So for now, I'll just keep this relatively simple. All right, so final touch-ups, let's just bring this down. So if I go ahead and play this, we see no items display yet. That's okay, we'll be right back to it. So with the form now on our modal, we're going to do two more things here, which is to bring in not only one button, but two buttons. So I'll bring this one down first. I'll copy and paste. And what these are going to serve as is our submit button and a reset button. So this one we can make a little more grayed out because it's not our focus, and then submit. Of course, for form design, I always prefer to make these typically green, or if you have a primary color selected for your schema, using that as well. So with what we'll do on these is the reset button will be set to reset form. That'll be form 1. And the submit button will be to submit the form, of course. And form 1. All right, so we have the form, we have our basic buttons, and we have the controls. Now, of course, the final problem is we need to interact and build in that dynamicism. So whenever, especially after I've added all the components, at least for the initial base of a modal, or any component for that matter, now I'm gonna just go ahead and bring these all together. And I will actually Control G to group these, and I will call this the new request modal. So now, how do we make this dynamic? Thankfully, it's relatively simple because we have the visible property. And what's nice is once you group all of this together, if you click the visible property or go to the visible property in the formula bar, this will actually apply to all of them. So to just hide these real quick, now that we've built out the design, now we can focus on triggering that to happen. And the simplest way to do that is to use a context variable. So this is also where, coincidentally, we are going to be triggering the form to be reset for new form. So we'll do two things. We'll do new form, form 1, semicolon, and now we will call the update context, and we will create a variable called show request modal. We will set that to true. So I'll hold Alt real quick and I'll click this. And now that we have that variable set, I can select the group, go to visible, and I'll find my variable. And now you can see that it reappeared for us. So now that we have it being triggered, now we can also go to this icon, the close icon, and do the reverse where update context, show request modal is false. And so now if I click this, you'll see it goes away. I can re-click it, and lo and behold, we now have our form modal. And what's convenient in this approach is now, since we also have the reset ability, it makes it easy for someone as they're filling out information. If they did make a mistake, they can reset it. And actually, we would need to add one thing to this. And now if we have reset and the new form, and what's going on here is because the reset form sets it back, the default for the edit form type is to be editing. So it is looking for the existing item. Since we don't have one, there's no item to display. But if we follow it with the new form function, now it'll reset itself. And to show one more time, there you go. All right, so I'll go ahead and save. And that is the PowerApps modal. So if you have any questions, we'll be continuing on this idea. There's a lot of different ways, of course, now that this serves as a base canvas for any other kind of functionality. A great example is to bring in graphs or potentially either subtables or subforms that exist. There's really now a whole other avenue that you can provide additional UI and UX for the user, now incorporating the modal. So I appreciate the time and look forward to the next video.